The drawing room has gone silent, and I can hear my own heartbeat over my father's voice. He has just told me that Viscount Pemberton will call again on Thursday, and that this time there will be no refusal, no polite excuse, no quiet retreat to my chambers while the servants whisper behind closed doors. He says the word inheritance the way other men say a threat. He says I have until the season's end to choose between his ledgers and my own future. I already know what I will choose. I chose it years ago, in a library that smelled of old paper and summer rain, when a vicar's son reached above my head for a book I could not quite reach. My father does not know his name. My mother suspects and weeps because of it. The tongue whispers already, certain that I have lost my senses. They are not wrong that I have lost something. I have simply gained something far greater in its place. By the week's end, I will either be a viscountess, or I will be nothing at all in the eyes of this family. I have already decided which I would rather be, even if it means waiting alone for a man who may never return to claim me. Before we continue, a brief note. This story is entirely fictional, and any resemblance to actual persons or places is purely coincidental. Now, tell us where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city or country in the comments below. If stories like this one move you, consider subscribing. This channel is built on persistence, and every subscription helps us keep bringing these narratives to life. Here is a question worth sitting with before we go further. How long would you wait for someone, knowing the world around you is urging you to move on? Keep that question close. By the end of the story, you may find your answer has changed. The Ashcombe estate had once been counted among the finest in Hampshire, its ledgers as tidy as its gardens. That was no longer the case. 3 years earlier, the Earl had staked a considerable portion of the family's fortune on a shipping venture bound for the continent, convinced by a persuasive cousin that the returns would restore Ashcombe to its former glory. The venture collapsed amid a diplomatic dispute that closed half the ports of Europe to English trade. What remained was not illness nor tragedy, but something far more ordinary and far more binding: debt. A quiet, suffocating, socially acceptable form of ruin that no physician could cure. Compounding matters further was the ancient legal instrument that governed the Ashcombe lands. An entail passed down through generations of eldest sons, which meant that upon the Earl's death, the estate itself would pass not to Rosalind, but to a distant cousin she had met only twice. She would inherit nothing but her name, unless her marriage secured what the law refused to grant her. This was not fiction. It was the ordinary architecture of English inheritance. In the period, and it explains, more plainly than any villain ever could, why a father might press his daughter toward a marriage of convenience rather than one of feeling. Enter Viscount Pemberton, a man whose fortune was as considerable as his confidence. He called upon Rosalind with flowers, with compliments, with a practiced gentleness that many in the ton mistook for devotion. He spoke often of how little she would need to concern herself with, once they were wed. Her correspondence, he said, he would happily manage. Her allowance would be dispensed as he saw fit, so that she might never trouble her mind with such tedious matters. A suitor who offers to relieve a woman of her burdens is not always offering care. Often, piece by piece, he is offering to relieve her of her independence instead, dressing the exchange in the language of protection, so that neither she nor her family notices what has actually been surrendered. Pemberton never once asked Rosalind what she wished her future to look like. He had already decided it for her, and mistook her silence for gratitude. That silence, however, was calculation, not consent. While Pemberton called with his flowers, William Harrington called with nothing but conversation. Their meetings had begun in an academy library, then continued in the quiet corners of a coffee house tucked behind a faded green awning, far from the eyes of the ton. There, over simple cups of dark, unfashionable coffee, William asked Rosalind what she wanted. Not what her father wanted. Not what society expected. It was, for a woman raised entirely to anticipate the wishes of others, an entirely foreign question, and one she found she could not stop turning over in her mind. It did not take long for whispers to travel. By early autumn, the story of the Earl's daughter and the vicar's son had reached every drawing room worth mentioning. A woman seen too often in the company of a man beneath her station was not merely inviting talk. She was inviting scandal, and scandal was a currency that could bankrupt a family faster than any failed shipping venture. Sensing the danger, the Earl escalated his campaign with the efficiency of a general mobilizing for battle. Within a single month, 3 further suitors were paraded through the Ashcombe drawing room. A baron with considerable land in Kent, a colonel newly returned from service on the continent, and the son of a wealthy merchant whose fortune was vast enough to erase the family's debts twice over. Rosalind received each of them with immaculate propriety, poured their tea without a tremor, and refused every one of them with the same quiet, immovable resolve. By the 4th refusal, patience in the household had worn thin, and it was her mother, not her father, who finally broke. The Countess came to Rosalind's chambers one evening, her voice trembling with an exhaustion that had nothing to do with the hour. A woman who refused too many advantageous offers did not remain merely unmarried, the Countess explained. She became a cautionary tale, whispered about at every ball for a decade. Her younger sisters tainted by association long after she herself had ceased to care what anyone thought. Rosalind listened in silence, and for the first time, felt the true weight of what she was risking. It was not merely her own future at stake. It was her mother's peace, her sister's prospects, the quiet dignity of a family already teetering on the edge of ruin. And yet, when she thought of Pemberton's hand closing gently but firmly around the entirety of her future, and then thought of William, who had asked her, again and again, what she herself wanted, she found she could not make herself regret a single refusal. That very week, a letter arrived at the Ashcombe estate, sealed with the Earl's own hand. It did not ask. It informed. Rosalind was to accept Viscount Pemberton's proposal within the fortnight, or she would be formally removed from the family's protection, her name struck from correspondence, her presence unwelcome at Ashcombe from that day forward. Rosalind read the letter twice, her hands steady even as her heart was not. She had exactly 14 days to decide what she was willing to lose, and what, at last, she was no longer willing to live without. William Harrington received word of the ultimatum 3 days after it was delivered, carried to him not by Rosalind, who had been confined largely to the estate, but by a sympathetic maid who had grown fond of the letters passing between them. He read the note twice in the fading candlelight of his modest lodgings, and by morning, he had made a decision that surprised even himself in its clarity. He would not ask the Earl for Rosalind's hand. He had nothing to offer that could settle a ledger drowning in debt, and he understood, with a painful sort of honesty, that love alone had never once paid a family's creditors. Instead, he resolved to do something far harder than pleading his case. He would leave, and he would return only once he had become a man an Earl could not dismiss. He arrived at the Ashcombe estate unannounced. A breach of propriety, so severe the footman very nearly refused him entry. He was shown into the Earl's study, where he spoke plainly. "My lord," William said, his voice even despite the pounding in his chest, "I have not come to ask for your daughter's hand today. I cannot settle your debts, nor offer her the security a marriage to Viscount Pemberton would provide. But I ask that you delay her decision. Give me time to become a man worthy of standing in this room without shame." Such quiet departures were not uncommon among suitors of lesser means in the era. A man without fortune, faced with the ruin his presence might bring upon a family, would often step aside rather than force an immediate reckoning, not out of surrender, but in pursuit of the one thing that might change the arithmetic entirely: money honestly earned. The Earl studied him for a long moment, said nothing, and did not refuse him outright. It was in its own way permission enough. William left London that very week, carrying nothing but his art supplies, a few coins, and a fierce, burning vow. He traveled north, investing his sharp intellect into the roaring shipping and trade industries, then transforming the English economy. He worked through sleepless nights, took considerable risks on trading vessels bound for foreign ports, and slowly, methodically, accumulated a fortune that owed nothing to inheritance and everything to his own labor. The early 19th century saw a genuine and growing class of self-made merchants and tradesmen whose wealth, built through shipping and industry rather than land, began to rival that of the old aristocracy. It was one of the few legitimate paths by which a man born without a title could purchase both comfort and a measure of social standing, though rarely enough on its own to erase the prejudices of birth entirely. He purchased a modest estate of his own within 3 years. He was no longer the penniless vicar's son who had once borrowed a carriage's worth of courage simply to speak her name aloud. Yet for all his success, his heart remained locked inside a quiet London library, and he lived in constant, private terror that he would return only to find her married to a duke, her memory of him worn thin by time and comfort. He did not know the quiet rebellion taking place in London in his absence. For 5 long years, Lady Rosalind Ashcombe did the unthinkable. Viscount Pemberton proposed twice more. Wealthy barons and powerful lords courted her with fortunes that could buy kingdoms. She refused every single one of them. Her family threatened disinheritance. Her mother wept at breakfast for entire seasons. Society whispered that the Earl's daughter had lost her mind entirely, that no woman of sound judgment would refuse 5 years of advantageous offers for the sake of a memory. It is worth noting how quickly society mistook a woman's independence for madness. Rosalind was not irrational. She had simply made a decision most of the ton could not comprehend, that her own judgment of her future was worth more than the comfort of following theirs. What was labeled instability was, in truth, extraordinary self-possession. She had not lost her mind. She had made her choice years earlier, over a simple cup of coffee behind a faded green awning, and she refused to let the arithmetic of society barter it away. In the autumn of 1823, Mr. William Harrington finally stepped back onto the cobblestones of London. He had heard the rumors that Rosalind remained unmarried, turning down the entire ton for reasons no one could fathom. He did not go to her father's estate. Instead, driven by an instinct stronger than caution, he walked down the quiet side street, past the faded green awning, and pushed open the heavy wooden door of their secret coffee house. The rich aroma of roasting beans wrapped around him. And there, sitting by the window, was Rosalind. William froze. For a long, breathless moment, neither spoke. 5 years of separation, of grueling work, of quiet terror, melted into absolute silence. Slowly, Rosalind turned her head. Her eyes met his. The shock on her face transformed instantly into a radiant, breathtaking smile. The exact same smile that had once stopped his heart beneath a ballroom's chandeliers. "You are late, Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice trembling with a warmth 5 years had not diminished. "I have been waiting." William crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his. This time, he did not let her go. Moved, in the end, by his daughter's unbreakable resolve and the undeniable success of the man standing before him, the Earl relented, recognizing at last that some debts could never be paid with a daughter's misery. Within the year, Mr. William Harrington and Lady Rosalind Ashcombe were married in a small country church, far from the chandeliers and calculated courtships of the ton that had once tried so hard to keep them apart. There is a temptation in stories such as this to believe that the rigid arithmetic of the past always breaks the human spirit. Rosalind and William proved otherwise. They built a life not upon inherited wealth or title, but upon patience, sacrifice, and 5 long years of quiet, stubborn devotion. Yet it would be dishonest to call this story a simple triumph. William's fortune was bought with years he could never reclaim, spent in cold northern ports far from everyone he loved. Rosalind's constancy cost her 5 seasons of whispered ridicule, a mother's tears, and the quiet, mounting fear that she was refusing her future for a man who might never return at all. Neither of them escaped the cost of their choice. They simply decided, independently and long before they ever saw one another again, that the cost was worth paying. That is the lesson history leaves us, quietly, beneath the scandal and the whispered gossip of long-forgotten drawing rooms. Love that survives at no cost to anyone is rarely love that means very much at all. Honor, in every century, has always demanded patience, and often demands years no one else can see. The measure of William and Rosalind's devotion was never the ease of their courtship, but the 5 years each of them was willing to endure, separately and without certainty, for the chance to stand together again. Lady Rosalind Ashcombe refused every suitor placed before her for half a decade, not out of vanity nor rebellion, but because she understood, long before society ever forgave her for it, that some choices are worth every debt they demand. This story was created to show how marriage once worked as an economic contract, not just a romance. In Regency-era England, 1811 to 1820, inheritance law under the entail system routinely excluded daughters from family estates, forcing many women into marriages chosen for financial survival rather than affection. This wasn't fiction. It remained standard practice until reforms like the Married Women's Property Act of 1870 slowly gave women legal and financial independence within marriage. Rosalind's fictional refusal reflects a real historical tension. Women quietly resisting arranged unions long before the law caught up to protect their choices. The story humanizes that struggle.